Hello, this is the Long Box Review comic book podcast, and I'm your host, Eric. Welcome to the show. Today, my guests and I will recommend 5 comic books, at least, centered around this week's theme of Super Friends, and you can maybe guess as to why I chose that theme, so that you can have a totally awesome week of comics. And to help me with this curious curation are my podcast friends. At least I think of them as my podcast friends. From Meanwhile at the Podcast, the best pop culture podcast out there. Please welcome George, Rodney, Kristen, and Rich. Why don't you each introduce yourselves in the order in which you normally do when on Meanwhile at the Podcast? Let everybody know where they can interact with you on social media, and then we'll get started. So, George, I think you're up first.
Hi, everybody. I'm George Hanna. I don't have a personal presence out on social media that much. So when you see us post on social media as Meanwhile at the Podcast, that's me. And we are primarily on the site formerly known as Twitter at Meanwhile ATP. We're also at Meanwhile ATP on Instagram, Spoutable, and Blue Sky Social. And just to confuse things, we are at Meanwhile at the Podcast on Facebook.
And I'm Rodney Roberts, part-time, full-time artist and graphic designer, part-time amateur podcaster. You can find me on Instagram at The Art Nerd with 2 R's in the word nerd, and also on Facebook and Twitter, just Art Nerd.
I'm Kristen Gallhofer. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And unlike these guys, I don't have a super cool tag. I'm just Kristen Gallhofer.
And if you, my name's Rich. And if you'd like to follow me, I am on Twitter, which I'm still calling Twitter because the Supreme Court is still calling it Twitter. And then you can find me at Dr. Stay Puffed. That's Puft, like the Marshmallow Man.
Which is a great handle, Rich. I always enjoy hearing you say that every time I listen to an episode. So
awesome.
Sorry, just like with George earlier, with his joke, is the Supreme Court thing? Is that a thing?
Yeah, in one of their rulings, because both Facebook and Twitter were mentioned, were part of it. One of the justices said, Facebook is called Meta and Twitter is called X, but that changed since this lawsuit started. So we're going to continue to call them both Facebook and Twitter just to be consistent.
Yeah, everybody else calls them that too. So,
right.
Yeah. All right, that's cool. I had not heard about that. All right. So I will encourage everybody who's listening to this, go listen to Meanwhile at the Podcast. These guys have great conversations. I have been loving your discussions about the latest Doctor Who season. Mm-hmm. And whenever you talk about comics, and even when it's stuff that I'm not normally into, you guys make it sound interesting. And so I think you do a really great job, and I encourage everyone, like I said, to go listen to the show. And it comes out every Saturday.
Every Saturday,
every week. I don't know how you guys do it. I struggle to put out an episode every 2 weeks. So anyway, but I'm looking forward to releasing this episode because we're going to be talking about comic books that relate to the theme of Super Friends. And
wait, Super Friends? This isn't one of our Christmas gab bags? Oh, I'm pad. I got to read something else really quick.
Like I said, you could interpret it any way you want. If you think of Scrooge and Marley as super friends, I suppose you could go that way.
Okay, then we're golden.
So yeah, we're like I said, we're having a totally awesome week of comics. We're going to talk about a comic or a collection of comics, as the case may be, one for each day of the week, starting Monday. So George, why don't you start us off? What is your choice for a Super Friends comic for Monday?
Of course, everybody's favorite day of the week, Monday. I gotta have Monday, huh? Well, I know you said we're going to talk about alternates later, and I'm not going to go through all my alternates when we do that. But when you first brought this to us, one title popped into my head, and we've had so much time in between when you brought this up to us and now that time, all of a sudden, I started to doubt myself, and I started to think of so many other books. In the end, I came back to the original, which is really what you do. Go with your first decision, right? And I went with Giant Days. I mean,
Yes.
you can't get much more super friends than Daisy, Esther, and Susan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying to figure out, well, where do I start? Do I start like when they're really, really good friends, like at university for many years? And I said, no, let's just start with issue number 1 instead of picking some random issue where their friendship is starting. So we're talking Giant Days, created and written by John Allison, illustrated by Lisa Tremaine. Is that how you pronounce her name? Tremaine?
I believe so.
Colors by Whitney Cougar, letters by Jim Campbell, and it came out from Boombox. And I can't believe issue 1 is something like almost like 10 or 10 years old. I think it came out in early 2015 based on my research. Yeah, I can't believe it. It started that long ago. Obviously, it ended not too long ago. But so let's talk about Giant Days number 1. At the beginning, we're introduced to Daisy, Esther, and Susan. If anybody's not familiar with Giant Days, it's a story of these 3 girls in university and the hijinks that happen in their lives as they go through their time in university. Eric, I will admit, I know this is one of your favorite titles for the last probably decade.
Maybe ever, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Top 5.
I have to admit, I realized when I took it off my shelf, I never really finished the finite run. So this has encouraged me now to start from the beginning, because I already did, and I will eventually this year go through everything. Some of it will be new to me, which is great. And if nobody has ever read it before, I encourage everybody to do so. So if you're not familiar with the characters, everybody has a little archetype, as all stories do. So Daisy is kind of the naive one. Her head's kind of in the clouds. She's a dreamer. Esther's the goth, outgoing, tough one. And Susan is the more grounded, common sense focused person. And of course, if I recall correctly, as the title goes on, things switch around a little bit. But that's how we're introduced to them in issue number 1. And we're introduced to them 3 weeks into their freshman year of university. They're not roommates, they're dorm mates, where their rooms are next to each other, but they become fast, close friends. And at the beginning of the book, they talk about very quickly in one panel snippets what happened, like somebody broke up with somebody and how they handled it, or whatever they've done in the past 3 weeks that got them kind of close together in such a short period of time. To get the story going, there's a bet that Esther can't be drama free for a total of 3 days, because she's known as a drama field around her. That's what they call it. Things always seem to happen when Esther is around. When they're out on the quad or whatever they call it in England, they see their friend Ed, who is talking to a transfer student named McGraw. And as introduces McGraw, it becomes very obvious that Susan has history with this guy. And not only can you tell from the way she's speaking in the dialogue boxes, but the artwork changes a little bit. She had been drawn as the most kempt of them all, the most put together. And all of a sudden, when she sees McGraw, she becomes this maniacal character that did not match any of the artwork from the previous couple of pages. So you could tell that there's some sort of a history, and it's not good between her and McGraw. Have a little encounter in the quad, and then she just storms off. So now this leaves Esther and Daisy to figure out what the heck is going on. But they go about their day in their normal routine. So Esther is going to go boxing, and Daisy goes to console Susan by herself. Susan tells Daisy to go away. She's laying down in bed, depressed, and then she says, "Come on, we got to get over this." So she eventually gets out of bed, heads over to Daisy's room to apologize for how she acted. And she walks in on Daisy watching something on her computer laptop that gets her really, really embarrassed, and she tells Susan, "Get out, get out, get out, get out," and covers her screen. So what is she doing on this screen here? We'll find out that by the end of this issue, by the way. Later, Esther and Susan go to Daisy's room, and Susan is coerced into a literal flashback about McGraw. And by literal, they say flashback, flashback, flashback. They want her to do a flashback. So in the panels, we see the area where Susan grew up, and apparently McGraw was in the town where she grew up, and that's how they met. But he doesn't go into detail. You could guess that maybe they had a romantic relationship, but it doesn't get into that too much detail, because Susan interrupts herself and says it's dinner time. We have to go to the cafeteria. In the cafeteria, Esther teases Susan about McGraw, and Susan wants none of this. So she takes Esther's debit card, tosses it across the cafeteria to make her have to go away and leave her alone for a little while. As Esther goes to retrieve her debit card, her drama field apparently takes effect, and all sorts of chaos ensues as a college, as one of her fellow students tries to pick up the debit card in a gentlemanly way. And as he does that, he trips somebody. There's a chaos bit of events, almost like a la Marx Brothers or Abbott and Costello or something, and all sorts of things happen in the cafeteria, causing Esther to lose her bet about not causing any drama over the course of 3 days. She couldn't even last a day. In that encounter in the cafeteria, we also find out that Ed, who, if you remember, was originally talking to McGraw at the beginning of the issue, Ed is secretly in love with Esther. So that's going to be playing out over the course of issues as it goes on. Esther loses the bet. They're back in the dorm room. The penalty for losing the bet was she had to give Susan massages. So she's giving Susan massages, and they start to ask Daisy about, what were you watching on your laptop when Susan walked in on you the other day? And Daisy admits they were napkin folding videos because she likes the autonomous sensory meridian response, the ASMR. She just likes the sound of the folding napkins. And she goes, "Oh, am I a pervert?" And they go, "No, no, 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 you're not a pervert." And as you can tell, I know I'm doing this quickly, but this book, the thing that is so magical about this book, and Eric, you'll probably agree, and everybody else who's read, I saw Rich and Kristen nodding. I don't know if Rodney's ever read it, but it's funny, but the slice of life type of stuff is also, heartbreaking. I mean, as time is going to go on, we're going to find out what happened with Susan and McGraw and Esther and Ed, and, all these things that go on in university life. And I think we can all put ourselves in those shoes of late teens, early 20s, making friends at college, a new world for everybody. Things are changing. So that's why I love this book. And I don't think I'm focusing on the humor as much, but there's humor in this book. Turns out also, as the comic ends, as issue number 1 ends, we also find out that Ed and McGraw are roommates. That's why they were talking on the quad earlier. And it appears that not only does Ed have feelings for Esther, but McGraw might still be carrying a torch for Susan, because the last panel of the comic, spoiler alert, he has photos of her, like from a photo booth, it looks like. Those photo booths where you get like four shots of yourself. You go into the booth, you get the 4 pictures. And that's how the first issue ends. So it introduces 3 friends. Even though they say they've only known each other for 3 weeks, it seems like they've gone through almost like 3 years worth of stuff in 3 weeks to feel that close to each other. And as the story goes on, that super friendship, to explain why I chose this book, the super friendship goes on as their university life continues throughout Giant Taste. But it's right there in issue number 1. That's why there was no reason for me to go deeper to say like issue 10. It was right there in issue 1.
Mm-hmm. That is such a great choice. In fact, I almost chose Giant Days as well, but it was just like, because I have the entire run. In fact, George, I love this book so much. I bought all the trades.
That's how I have them, by the way. I didn't buy the single issues. I did buy the trades.
And then I bought the I think the library editions, the hardcover library editions.
And those are kind of recent, right?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, the last one came out within the last year, something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a brilliant book. It is fun. It is funny. It is so creative in the visuals, and so many poignant moments that happen in this. And Rodney, have you read this book at all?
So what I was going to say was I just leaned over and I literally just put my hands on the first.
Oh, nice.
There you go. There you are.
Which I have not read.
Okay.
So
there you go.
Spoiler alert.
These are my daughter. And so now I definitely want to check them out. I mean, but they're sitting over here on the floor of my office. So I'll have to read them now.
That's your homework assignment.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And Kristen and Rich, you're familiar with this book as well, right? Yeah.
I'm familiar. I haven't read them all like Rich, but yeah, absolutely familiar.
Yeah,
Ah.
I was thinking about how like my pick of the week would often be the first in the new series that was
Mhm.
coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was buying these when you guys had the store. It was on
Yeah.
my list to not get the issues, but to get the trades, which is how you guys also had put aside the specials. So I do have the specials too.
Nice.
And had I not had it on my pull list, you guys wouldn't have pulled them for me. And sometimes I might have missed them. So I'm glad I had put the trades on the list, and you guys knew to well, that's what you used to do with your customers anyway. So that was great.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a great way to start a week.
It is. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Let me tell you, Mondays suck. I don't care what anybody says. Mondays suck, but if you have an issue of Giant Days, you're good to go.
Yes,
Thanks.
exactly. All right. Well, George, that was an excellent choice to start us off on Monday. I'm really curious where Ronnie's going to go for Tuesday. What do you got for us?
So yeah, I really did try to come up with something a little more obscure, but I mean, in the terms of like super friends, I don't think I could have come up with anything more cliche. But I bring to the table The Man of Steel, Volume 1, number 3. So this was the original Man of Steel miniseries, the first post-crisis team up or meeting of Batman and Superman. And as you guys all know, and if anyone who listens to our show knows, like Batman is like my favorite DC character of all time. So I mean, this book
Ronnie
holds
would not have guessed looking at the wall behind you. So
Batman to the left of me, Batman to the right of me, Batman everywhere. But yeah, and this is 1986, written and drawn by John Byrne. This is like the pretty much close to the beginning of my personal immersion into comics. I mean, I was always just a fan of comics, starting from like the Sunday comics, Archie comics, and then gradually work my way into Marvel and DC books. But Crisis on Infinite Earths was like the first big like event comic that I read, and once that was over with, I was naturally inclined or excited to like jump into this post-crisis universe. Um, and John Byrne's always been a favorite creator of mine, writer and artist. And this Man of Steel book is just like, I don't know, as far as his works go, it's definitely in the top 10 of works that he put out. But anyway, like I said, it's the first post-crisis meeting of these two top-tier superheroes, and it's a reimagining, if you will, of not just the characters themselves, but their relationship. Because up until then, the Silver Age and Golden Age comics, these two were always smiling, buddy, like just happy-go-lucky characters.
yeah,
Like
best friends from the get-go.
yeah,
Basically,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
Fighting the forces of evil, like no innocents harmed, but yeah. But everything changed because also in 1986, not only was this the post-crisis era, but you also had The Dark Knight Returns. So they sort of had to like change the character of Batman to align with what Frank Miller had done over in that book, and made him a like harder, grittier, like take no S from any one character. So this particular issue of the Man of Steel 6-issue miniseries, number 3, it starts out with this classic 9-panel page layout, and it's very reminiscent of the first Batman scene of Joss Whedon's Justice League, where he's chasing this common thief slash burglar through the streets of Gotham. And immediately from the setup, the scenery, and the way it's drawn that this is not Metropolis. This is a Superman book, but you're definitely not in Metropolis anymore. So this is Gotham City. And the second page, he's caught this robber, and Batman's standing over him. And you learn that he's basically working a case. There's a museum, a case of a string of museum robberies or heists. And Batman's trying to obviously get to the bottom of it. So he catches this guy, and he's not really able to get anything out of him. The guy like gets away from him, and Batman takes off in pursuit. And as he's chasing this guy, Superman swoops in and takes Batman. He's like, I'm taking you to jail. I've caught wind of your vigilantism and I'm here to put a stop to it, which is kind of ironic because isn't Superman kind of being a vigilante himself, trying to take in Batman? But anyway, Batman gets away from Superman. And once Superman catches up with him, this robber's long gone. So Batman catches up with him and he explains to him, hey, I know who you are. I've been monitoring your activities. I'm well aware of your abilities and what you can do. And basically, I know you're better than me. You can take me in. But if you do try to take me in, he has surrounded himself with a force field. And the force field, if penetrated, is going to set off a bomb somewhere in Gotham City and kill an innocent person. So this prevents Superman from physically, forcibly taking Batman into the authorities.
And isn't that when Superman after he hears that from Batman, the look that John Byrne draws on Superman's face is like this total astonishment that he would potentially injure or kill an innocent. And It's just like Superman's never really encountered something like that.
Exactly. Like this guy will go to no means or go to no ends to accomplish his goal. And who is that dedicated or to their mission to where they will take out an innocent person to reach their goal. So you'll find out later at the end of the story what Batman's mode of thinking was and why he said and did what he did. So anyway, the two agree to work together after Batman explains to him why he was chasing that criminal and explains to him the string of robberies that he's investigating. So Superman agrees to help him out and they work together. So they're teaming up, but they're not quote unquote friends at this point. They're just partners trying to reach the same end goal. And so you discover that there's a new villainess introduced by the name of Magpie. And she is the one who is robbing all of these museums for these beautiful, rare, valuable trinkets and baubles. And so eventually, Batman and Superman, there's a lot of stuff that happens in between, but Batman and Superman catch up with her and they realize that I don't want to spoil anything, but they figure out who this person is, why she's doing what she's doing. And this is all due to like Batman's detective skills and deduction. So he's able to like trace this particular character back to another location or building, and they figure out who it is, take her in, and then these two figure out that they can work together, but they don't necessarily have to be friends, and they may not ever be friends. But the innocent life that Batman, you find out the innocent life that he was going to take was his own. So the whole time the bomb was planted on himself. So Superman asks, before they part, he's like, okay, where's this bomb that you mentioned? And he pulls it out of his belt and gives it to him. And so you realize that, Superman probably could tell that he was lying, but he wasn't lying. So that was basically the end of the story where, by the end of the story, you realize that this is not going to be the same Batman-Superman relationship that you're used to pre-Crisis. Which is, I much prefer this dynamic.
I was going to ask that.
There are two different sides of the same coin, so to speak.
Well, and there's another. It's kind of a Crisis homage or suggestion in that very final panel where Batman's thinking about Superman. Who knows? In a different reality, I might have called him friend.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that time period when DC was, reforming, coalescing into, the post-Crisis universe, and things were a little different in some cases, and things were a lot different. And at first, I like you, I enjoyed this new dynamic between Superman and Batman. But quite honestly, I think later on they kind of took it too far. And I was kind of yearning for them to be super, actual super friends
Super
again.
Friends, yeah.
Yeah.
There is I mean, I guess I'm not really prepared to talk about it as an alternate, but I mean, I do remember a comic back in the early 2000s where they did the Batman Superman book, and I think it was annual number one with the two of those guys before they knew each other's secret identities, and they were on a cruise ship together.
Oh,
And
yes.
you remember that one? I
Yep.
mean, there were a lot of like gags and jokes. It was pretty funny, and I mean, I think that was probably the closest that they've come to like just the lighter side of the relationship being depicted post-crisis. So
Yeah.
that was a funny book.
I assume everybody here is familiar with that particular miniseries in this issue.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the miniseries, but to be honest, they didn't. I, I I remember the covers, how they would structure. Like John Byrne had that format for each cover, but I don't really remember the details. And like we say on our show so often, if you don't remember what you read, did you really read it? You know. But I do remember that. And those 30 years between post crisis and New 52, I really love those 30 some odd years of DC
Yeah.
continuity. And there you go. Yeah, there you have the cover, right? Magpie. Right.
This is actually this is my second copy of this book because I have the original one that I bought off the newsstand, and it was very well read, loved, worn. And I found the entire series. It was 4 or 5 years ago in like a dollar bin, and I bought all of them again. So this is a fresh copy of it.
I've got 2 copies of this issue as well, Rodney. Same thing,
Yeah.
off the shelf. And then later, I'm not sure why I acquired a newer copy. Maybe because it was slightly better condition.
Because it was there.
It could be, yeah. Well, I was actually wondering if anybody would pick like a Superman Batman thing, or something along those lines, a superhero friendship, and which choices would those be? Because there's a whole gamut of superhero friendships.
Oh man,
that you could choose from. So that's really cool. All right, that's for Tuesday. So Man of Steel there, number 3. Next up is Kristen for Wednesday, the middle of the week. What have you chosen for our lovely listeners?
So the trade is what I recommend in total for Spencer and Locke. I'm going to talk about the first issue as to not spoil the rest of the trade, but I think once you read the first issue, you want to read the trade anyway, and it'll be easier to find in trade format. So Spencer and Locke came out. Action Lab put it out. It's written by David Pepos. The art is by George Santiago Jr. Colors are Jason Smith, and letters Colin Bell. The best way to describe it was actually when we had David Pepos on our podcast, was the way he described it, which was Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City, which I thought was perfect.
That is great.
Analogy. Yeah. So it is a very Calvin and Hobbes beginning with the main characters, obviously Spencer and Locke. And Spencer's a little boy, and Locke is his little Puma toy, and it's a little plushie. And it's very cute in the beginning because they're in a little wagon and they're having fun, and then that whole illusion sort of shatters when reality comes into play, and you see that Spencer's actually an abused child from a very abusive mother. And in that first page, you see that change from the world he wishes he had with Locke and what is really happening. And his mother goes in for the punch as Locke is cowering behind Spencer, and then there's a blam, and then it jumps ahead to the future where they are grown up and they are investigating a murder. And you see Spencer's all grown up, and Locke is also all grown up. He's a 6-foot panther with a button eye at this point, in a suit with a trench coat, looking the detective part. And Locke and Spencer are sort of shooting ideas off of each other, and they end up going into a diner and they're sitting across from each other discussing the case and realizing that, in fact, Spencer knew the murder victim. It was someone that he grew up with as a child. And as they're having this conversation, a little girl walks up and says, "Excuse me, sir, who are you talking to?" And then we see what she sees, which is our actual reality, which is Spencer sitting across from a little plushie, a little blue worn plushie with a button for an eye. And that just takes you back like, well, okay, wow. So this character has definitely grown with him as he's become an adult and has become his partner and best friend. And so we move on through the story, and Locke gives important information, what he's found at the crime scene to Spencer, which of course helps him to process. So he's there helping to process as well. So as the story progresses, they are working on this murder case together, and you see how Locke has Spencer's back, but not really. Like you think he does, and Spencer thinks he does, but does he really actually have his back? Like how real is Locke? But what we know for sure is that Spencer believes in him and has confidence from him and feels supported and feels like he's got his bestie looking out for him. The plot continues to thicken. And then there's not in this issue, but in a future issue, there's a panel that just totally made me cry because you start to really get attached to these characters, but especially Locke, who, as far as we know, is really just a plushie, but he has his own personality. So I think that their relationship, is just pure because he created this friend, or this friend magically appeared for him to protect him from reality, to protect him from his mom, to protect him from other scary things that come along in life. And he always feels like he has someone there with him. And then I guess the big question of the book, throughout the story and the characters that are introduced is how real is Locke? And really what it comes down to in one of these parts is he's as real as you need him to be. And so I thought that was really deep, you know? So those are my super friends. They're not super powered, but they have a super friendship and a very interesting friendship. And yeah, and if you like Calvin and Hobbes, it's really great because if you keep in mind, and they do go to flashbacks where you see them as little kids, it's really special because you get that feel too, in addition to the fact that it's also Sin City, basically. But yeah, so I picked that one just because they were, when I was thinking about who were some of my favorite friends in comics, they came up because I just have such a special place in my heart for Locke and the little gun-toting plushy puma. Yeah, so those are my super friends, and I highly recommend the trade. I think if you were just to get the first issue, you'd immediately want to keep reading more. So just pick up the trade. Again, David Pepos, put out by Action Lab. 100%. Please read it and then comment about what you think about it.
Yeah. So I actually picked up the trade because of your interview with the writer on the show. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with you, Kristen. This works on a few different levels, right? It's about the friendship that Calvin and Hobbes has. If you love those characters, which I do, and then you get this alternate take on that friendship, and it's completely different, but sort of the same. And I agree. I mean, who would want to have an imaginary, imaginary
right
friend
quotes,
like
yeah.
Locke, right? That helps him in that way. And yeah, that's the case that they're investigating, and there's some brutality in it, and some really icky things that Spencer had to deal with, as a young kid.
Yep.
That he's still dealing with as an adult. And it's a great story on so many different depths to it. It's a great choice. It's a wonderful choice. So totally fits the Super Friends idea. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a deep book with its, besides the super friendship that you were talking about, but it's deep in its exploration of PTSD.
Definitely.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it has so many different layers to it that you almost wish it was more than a 4-issue miniseries. I know there was a sequel to it, but not that you want to be caught up in that PTSD, but there was so much to explore
Mhm.
that it would have been nicer. It would have been nice to be in that world just a little bit longer,
Yes.
even as sordid as it was.
Hmm.
Right.
That was only episode 6 of our show that we
Oh,
introduced.
wow.
Interviewed David.
Wow. There is a Spencer and Locke trade paperback too. So yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, cool. I didn't know if you had said that, but yeah, there's a second trade.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the first one is just what really pulled me in though, and the second was also really awesome. But I just love the support that Locke gives Spencer, and I don't know, like you said, who wouldn't want an imaginary friend like that?
Mhm.
Yes. And I mean, and he, if you enjoy like anthropomorphic noir detectives, it's Locke is much
Yeah.
much better than I think it's pronounced Blacksad or Blacksad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read that first volume and then I read Spencer and Locke. I'm like, I prefer this cat.
Yeah.
That's-
Okay. So that was Wednesday. Next up is Rich for Thursday, and I have no idea, Rich, what you have chosen.
Oh, great.
I had some
love it.
ideas about the other choices, so this is all new to me. So great, let's move
Okay.
into Thursday.
Well, okay. So, but my choice is Stormbreaker, the saga of Beta Ray Bill. And this is by Michael Emming and Dan Berman, art by Andrea DeVito, colors by Laura Villari, and lettering by Chris Eliopoulos and Russ Wooten. And a little thing you might recognize Chris Eliopoulos from the I Am series. I Am Rosa Parks, I Am Abraham Lincoln,
Oh, okay, yeah.
kids books. So he does the art for those. And he has continued to be, I think he started, because this is 2005, this came out. So I think he started in lettering and then moved on to like art and writing stuff. So there's a little tidbit about that. Um, I will admit, I chose this because I wanted to read it. And I figured Beta Ray Bill would be as good friends with Stormbreaker as Thor was with Mjolnir. This ended up being an excellent, the whole trade, the 6 issues, being an excellent example of many different kinds of super friendship. A lot of them are going to be cliches that we've seen, things that people have brought up before. But it starts with a classic 2 guys, super powered, similar power sets. It's Thor and Beta Ray Bill, and they're fighting in Ragnarok. And Beta Ray Bill's ready to die alongside all the other Asgardians. And Thor says, no, you have to live. Someone has to remember us, and you're still needed here in the universe, and not mentioning, we'll be back. It's like, yeah, they already wrote that part for us. They predicted we'll be back, and probably gonna be back real soon. So Bill then he travels with Stormbreaker, his only friend, kind of left now, across the galaxy to where the rest of his people have relocated. Because Beta Ray Bill is a construct that has being soul like absorbed into it or combined in it. So he is like he's a robot, essentially, body with a consciousness inside it. Anyway, he travels across the galaxy to his people, and when he gets there, they are under attack from Galactus. And so he's got to deal with that whole thing. It doesn't go well because he's Galactus. And his herald is Stardust at the time, which I believe is the introduction of Stardust. And then I don't know if Stardust makes it out of this one. So in and out in 6 issues. An interesting character though. Anyway, moving on. So then after he kind of loses really to Stardust and Galactus, he wakes up on the battlefield and then goes to try and find, or he gets a signal. And so he goes after it, and it's Scuttlebutt, which is his sentient ship that he is totally friends with. I mean, they are the best of friends. At one point, he has to fly out of Scuttlebutt, and he doesn't have time to find a door, so he just blows out of a bulkhead, and he's like, "Sorry, man, but I got to do this right now," and he just shoots out the side of the ship. So there's another friendship. It's similar to, but slightly different from being friends with a weapon. You know, you have a lot of superpowered or maybe just heroes or villains for that matter who have a very close relationship with their weapon. You know, I'm also thinking of like Barbaric, which I brought up several times on our podcast, but they're more like coworkers or frenemies, because I don't think the Barbarian particularly likes the Axe, and the Axe really wishes he killed more people so he could drink their blood. So I think the relationship with Stormbreaker and Beta Ray Bill is definitely more amicable, more of a friendship, and he's friends with his ship as well, Scuttlebutt. So anyway, then he ends up having to team up with Stardust to fight Astaroth, and so you get that tenuous friendship between enemies, and so Beta Ray Bill goes from fighting Stardust to teaming up with Stardust to fight an even worse enemy, an Astaroth. And so there's that tenuous friendship, you know, like they have to trust each other enough to go into battle together. Then you get what, and I don't know if I stole this from someone else, but it's the Xeno Ex Machina, replacing God with an alien. So these friends from another universe see that he had to fight Astaroth, which it turns out was one of their people who they had banished to this other realm and accidentally escaped. And so he's got these friends he didn't even know about who pull him out of death and incarnate him into a dead body on Earth, where he wakes up in an alleyway. And then a mutant pig guy who's being chased by Spider-Man like comes past him, and then he kind of starts fighting the pig guy, and you get that relationship where two heroes meet. And at first they're like, "Oh, are we gonna have to fight over this?" And then they figure out, no, we're both going to fight this guy, this other third person, and we should team up and do that. And then by the end of it, you know, Spider-Man bought him a slice of pizza. He listened to his story, and he's got another friend in Spider-Man as he then tries to figure out what he's going to do now that he's in this body. I think he does have Stormbreaker, but Scuttlebutt's out there in the universe somewhere. He doesn't know where Thor is or any of the other Asgardians. I mean, he assumes they're dead. And then his people, he knows that some amount of his people are still alive after being decimated time after time, going after with Galactus going after them. And yeah, so it ended up being lots of friendship, and there's no way Bill could have survived this without all of his friendships. And yeah, so it was really good, and I recommend it.
Wow. Okay. First up, and please forgive me, everybody listening and everybody on this call. I have read very little of Beta Ray Bill. In fact, even though it was coming out at the time that I was getting into comics, Walt Simonson's run on Thor that introduced the character, never read it. I have a trade collection, and I've been meaning to get into it, and now I think I will. And Rich, your description of that miniseries, that Stormbreaker miniseries, Now I want to read that. I got to go buy that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Mhm.
from Kristen, I got to go buy Spencer and Locke Volume 2 and now the Stormbreaker
Yeah.
trade collection. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It was, I gotta say, it was a lot better than I thought it was gonna be.
George and Rodney, have you read this particular series?
I have not. I didn't even know it existed.
Me neither, and I don't remember it either. And you said it was like 20 years old, Rich?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it existing. So no, I have not read that.
This is one of those trade paperbacks I don't think I would have necessarily picked up on my own, but it was in a collection that I purchased from someone. And like, it ended up being one of those things where I'm moving a box and it was on top. And I was like, well, I haven't read this. I'm going to have to give this a read.
Yeah.
And yeah, do not regret.
Right.
So had you read that by the time I invited you to do this show with that theme in mind, or
No, I was given the brief, read a book about Super Friends. And I was like, well, he's got to be super friends with his hammer. I want to read this. I'm just gonna. And then it just ended up being that way where it worked out way better than I thought it would for this theme, but then also just as a story.
yeah,
It was good. There's a lot of fighting, a lot of, who's got the upper hand, the back and forth between Bill and Stardust, really, really great. The aliens in the machine towards the end, I was a little okay, but it was that or they'd kill him off, I guess.
it's superhero comics. We have to make certain concessions at times.
Right. Yep.
Well, that's another great choice. I don't know how I can follow up with that. But what I see for my Friday pick, I see kind of a through line with developing friendships over time. So that's cool. I'm glad that has happened just organically here. So, but my choice that I'd like to recommend, and this is not really thinking outside the box, but I had several options in mind when I was thinking about what I could choose for this. And most of them were superhero comics. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to choose something a little different. But what I did choose, and I may talk about some of those later on if we have time, but what I did choose is from Vertigo / DC Comics at the time, Sandman number 13, which is part four of the Doll's House arc. This was published in 1990, January 1990, I believe. A bit of trivia about this. I thought it was strange because issue 12 came out in November of 89, and a large part of the plot involves the years that end in 89, and yet this came out in 2 months after issue 12. So I wondered if there was some sort of delay in publishing this for some reason. Anyway, this is, like I said, Sandman number 13. The title is Men of Good Fortune. And I will account myself as a man of good fortune, because when I saw the title, I thought, well, this, given who appears in this issue, this must be some sort of Shakespearean reference, or is it Marlowe that appears in this, right? So I was looking it up, but I couldn't find anything like that. What I did find, however, is a song by the same name by Lou Reed. And that the song by Lou Reed, and this is from, I found this on oldtimemusic.com. I've never visited that site before, but I liked what they said about it. This is what they say about the song. It reflects the transient nature of wealth, success, and life itself. It encourages listeners to contemplate the true meaning of fortune and reminds them that material possessions do not equate to fulfillment and happiness, which does come into play here. So, given that, I thought, and then I typed out my notes, like a month ago, and I've been messing with them ever since, because that's what I do. Mm-hmm. At one point in the last month, I thought, you know what I should do? I should contact Neil Gaiman on social media and ask him about this title.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of would forget about that. And as we were finalizing our schedule and getting everybody here, prepared to get everybody here to discuss these comic books, it occurred to me that I needed to do that. And of course, in my usual fashion, I wait till the last possible second. And I did it this morning, right hours before we were supposed to get together and record. So I typed out on Blue Sky, because that's where Neil Gaiman is really good at responding. I think he did it on Twitter too, and maybe to a lesser degree now, but he's really responsive on Blue Sky. And so I just typed out this little message to Neil Gaiman asking him, did this come from the Lou Reed song? And he said, it did.
Get out of here.
Cool.
That's so cool.
All right, we have to reinitiate our Blue Sky account. Remember, meanwhile, ATP, folks.
That's right. That's right. Get out there. Anyway, like I said, so issue number 13 of Sandman, obviously written by Neil Gaiman, pencils by Michael Zulli, Steve Parkhouse on inks, Robbie Bush on colors, Todd Klein, the very prolific and famous, in my mind, Todd Klein, letters, Art Young and Karen Berger, of course, editors, with a great cover by Dave McKean, which may not be someone who is very familiar with for comic books nowadays. If you're a younger comic book or someone who just got into comic books, Dave McKean may not be a household name these days, but man, in the 90s, that guy was, it's not that he isn't anymore, but he's so good. I loved his Sandman covers. He did other things as well. The Dreaming. Anyway, great artist, great cover artist. So, all right. So basically this is a story that spans centuries. In 1389, Death convinces Dream, basically saying, hey, Dream, you need to get out and connect with the people who go into your realm every night, the millions upon millions of people. So Death is trying to get Dream to connect with humanity, and so they go into this pub, and we meet the character of Robert Hobb Gadling. And basically, Hobb is basically death is a Rube's game. I don't believe in it, so I'm not going to die. You fools, you believe in death, so you're going to die. And that gives Dream the idea of coming up with this challenge, basically. And he essentially asks Death, "Hey, do you mind if?" I mean, he doesn't. That's the nice thing about this story, is that there's very little discussion between Dream and Death, but you get the subtext there. You get what they're thinking between each other in the way that the story is told. So I really like that about Gaiman and Zulli in the way that they told that. But basically, Dream's like, "Hey, I want this guy not to die, just so I can see how this plays out." And there's another underlying reason for that. And maybe Death was aware of this, and that's why she was encouraging him. But I'll get to that. And so Dream basically says to Hobb, "Hey, let's meet in 100 years. And you tell me how things are going for you." And of course, next scene, they are, in 1489. Hobb is surprised that Dream is there. He knows obviously something is weird is going on, but he's liking it. What did he say here? He just announces he has no intention of ever dying. So he's still, after 100 years, he's still going for that. But he likes the progression of things like chimneys in the pub, and the use of handkerchiefs now. Little details like that, which are great. He spent most of this time, being a soldier or a soldier of fortune or even a thief. So, that goes into it. Dream says he'll be back. They'll meet again in 100 years. 1589 comes around, and Hobb is doing very well for himself. He's earned a knighthood or paid for one. He's also taken a wife, has a kid. And more importantly, I guess in this scene, this is where I believe the first time that we see a young William Shakespeare show up in the Sandman series. And then there's a later issue, which is beloved by people who had read the Sandman series involving Shakespeare. But it's a conversation between Shakespeare and Kit Marlowe about playwriting and what Shakespeare wants, what his desires are. And that comes into play a little bit later. But Hobb is like, everything is great. I can't wait for to see what the next century is like, and then we see Dream taking Shakespeare away and say, "Hey, I got a deal for you. It's sort of like what he did with Hob, but more direct, right? A century goes by. Hob has fallen on some hard times. And in fact, he tells Dream his wife died during childbirth. His son died 20 years later. And he talks about how, how much of a, what's a great way to say that? How much pain, I guess, that you endure when you are starving and you cannot die.
Mm.
And so, and he's obviously lost all of his fortune that he had the previous century. And Dream wonders, are you finally prepared to die? And Hob pauses for a moment, looks down, and then looks at Dream and says, no, he's got too much to live for. 1789 comes around. Unfortunately, Hob has taken up slave trading. Dream gives him some friendly advice at the end of the scene. Maybe you should get out of that. Which plays into the whole Sandman series, if you're aware of it, how that starts off with him being a prisoner for so long, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a nice callback. We meet Johanna Constantine, which is a character that would show up in, I can't remember if she actually showed up in Sandman again, but definitely in, there was a miniseries there a 4-issue miniseries that featured the character. I recall that she was in the John Constantine Hellblazer series as well. Anyway, she's after them because she thinks that Hob is the wandering Jew and that Dream is the devil. Mm-hmm. And she basically wants something out of it. Of course, that doesn't go well for her. And then that's the end of that century. And then in 1889, this is the time of Jack the Ripper. There's a little scene with a prostitute that Dream encounters. This is where Hob has started to notice that there are others around that do not die, like Mad Hetty, and he mentions Jason Blood of Demon fame. Mm-hmm. And I think that's about it for that one. They mention Dream mentions Johanna Constantine helping him on something, which I don't know. Do any of you know? Was that ever followed up on anywhere? I'm not aware of it.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not ringing a bell.
Oh, that's too bad. I want to read that story. Anyway, in that meeting, this next to last meeting of the story, Hob suggests to Dream that there's more to this than just Dream's curiosity about Hob's experiences throughout the centuries, and because Hob has realized that he hasn't grown significantly wiser. While he may learn from his mistakes, he still makes a lot of mistakes, different kinds of mistakes. And he basically says to Dream, I think you've been seeking friendship, and that's what I am. I'm your friend. Mm-hmm. And Dream it gets indignant with him. Mm. And this is a dialogue from that scene. You dare, Dream says, you dare imply that I might befriend a mortal? Mm-hmm. That my kind might need companionship, and then storms off. And Hob calls out after him, basically saying, if we meet again in 100 years, as we have been, it will be because we are friends. Mm-hmm. And then the issue ends in 1989, finally, where he's at the bar and Dream shows up. Hob says, I wasn't sure you were going to make it. And Dream smiles and says that it's impolite to keep one's friends waiting.
Yeah. I love that issue so much. I'm so glad you picked that one. It's one of my favorites.
Out of all the 75 issues of that run of Sandman, that and the Shakespeare one really stand out to me for sure. All right. Okay, just a few other things, if you guys don't mind, about this comic book. It won the favorite single issue of any series in the 1989 RAC Comics Awards poll, aka known as the Squiddies. Is anybody familiar with the Squiddies?
I remember the Squiddies.
So this is. Does everybody remember Usenet? And news groups?
Yeah.
So, that's a long time ago, but this was the Rec Arts Comics Usenet group. That they did this annually, I guess. I just found that reference like, wow,
Squiddies, huh?
Interesting. Hob Gadling makes 5 more appearances during the course of the series in issues 22, 53, 59, 71, and 72. And I remember really loving seeing him show up during the course of the series. And I always thought they should have done a miniseries with this guy.
Right.
Oh yeah. They should have done.
I mentioned Joanna Constantine earlier, although I think I may have said Constantine when I talked about that. Talked about her first, but that was her first appearance. I don't know if I mentioned that now. And I'm going to include this in the show notes, but if anybody wants to read a wonderful article about this specific issue, Sequart.com did a review of this particular issue. So that was a good read that I thought. Anyway,
Getting back to Hob really
Yeah.
quick. So they didn't see each other that one day every 100 years then if he appeared in other issues, right? I mean, they saw each other within the century, or are we to believe they only saw each other once every century?
it's once every
After they
century.
admitted friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those later issues are 1989 and on.
But not like 2089. It was whatever year they were in.
No. Yeah, this was
Okay.
I don't know. I'm sure it wasn't, because I don't remember any issues of Sandman going into like
To the
the far future.
Yeah.
No.
Mm-mm.
So
Okay.
so yeah,
So
I
they
think,
would see each other randomly throughout a century.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
They met at the pub every year.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then
okay.
after both of them admitted that they were friends, they allowed themselves to see each other outside of once every 100 years.
Yeah, I meant to say 100 years.
Okay. Okay, I see.
Saw each other at the pub every 100 years. Yes.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Well, that is a week, Monday through Friday, of comic books. But I thought we could even extend this a little bit more for the listeners and give them weekend picks, so they can go into their weekend with even more great comics around the theme of Super Friends. I thought we could maybe choose one alternate that we were thinking of and just talk about it real briefly. George, you want to start us off again?
Sure. So if we're going to pick one, and just to be honest, a lot of time had gone by between when you invited us and when we've recorded this. So again, my initial thought was Giant Days. And then because there was so much time, when you get a lot of time, you get to rethink things. Like if you're taking a test and you're going back to review your test after it's done and you have like an hour left, that's where you get into trouble, when you second guess yourself. So with all this time, I started thinking about other things. And my second choice, which I'll talk about real quick, and only quick just because I chose it. I haven't read it, but I am going to read it probably this week. So you'll see it posted on the site formerly known as Twitter at Meanwhile ATP, because I use the hashtag Comics 2024 to show what comics I've read throughout the year. The obvious choice when somebody suggests the theme of Super Friends is a Super Friends comic.
Yeah.
So I randomly picked out this issue, and of course it's still taped shut. So here you go, folks. Sound effects. I happened to pick issue number 4, where on the cover, Skyrocket is clobbering the Super Friends. And look who else is causing the Super Friends trouble? The Riddler. So I can't wait to read. And I just randomly picked an issue out of a long box. I figured it doesn't have to be number 1. I just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And of course, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, issue number 4. So that was my second choice out of all the other choices that came to mind between when you suggested this and invited us and now. So Super Friends number 4. How could you go wrong? It's in the title.
Yeah. You know what I love about the Super Friends comic book is, so I've been doing a bunch of episodes where I'm tracing my comics history from when I started in September-ish 1978. And I've been using Mike's Amazing World of Comics website to help me navigate that timeline and what came out when and all that stuff. And part of that is when you look up a particular issue, it lists, Mike had listed all of the characters in there, and then would show or would list where they would next appear.
Oh.
And so what I'm seeing a lot of for the characters, like in the Super Friends comics, like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc., is that their next appearance would be a Super Friends comic.
Interesting.
And so I don't know if Mike intended this or if it was a DC Comics thing, is that Super Friends is not like this shunted parallel universe of their characters, is that these adventures actually happen with those characters in the same continuity as their own books and with the Justice League book.
Interesting.
And I don't know if anybody else had that same. For me, it was like a revelation. It's like, oh, I always consider this like kind of off, out of continuity type thing, but it seems like it wasn't.
Well, on the top, it's almost like your show with your different imprints. On the top where it would say DC Comics, it would be a DC TV comic, much like the Shazam comic, and I think Isis eventually got her own.
Yeah.
Welcome Back, Kotter, which was another one of my Super Friends book because, hey, the Sweat Hogs, they're Super Friends, right?
Good choice.
But I would never thought that, also because I was a little young and I don't think I was reading Justice League at the time, and I didn't know what continuity was.
Oh yeah.
And I just figured, to me, I was getting it off of the spinner rack because I was watching the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Much like, I guess, maybe people who in the 90s, kids might have been buying the Batman Beyond comic because they were watching the cartoon, maybe.
Yeah. Well,
or the Batman animated or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. I always considered it to be like that. It's a tie-in comic, not an in continuity in the DC universe comic.
Yeah. So I never thought of it that way. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that, well, that's really interesting if you do that. And if you do, kind of chart the stories along to see how that progressed, I guess. I don't know. It was just a weird thought that I had.
Wait, so if DC TV comics are in continuity, are the Sweat Hogs in continuity?
They're part of the DC universe, George.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good pick. Super Friends. I was wondering if that would ever come up as well. I thought about choosing one from there because I have a few of those as well, George. All right, Rodney, what's your alternate pick?
Well, I didn't really come prepared to, like I said, discuss it, but I did talk briefly early on in the episode about Superman Batman Annual #1, which is kind of funny because it basically follows Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne, like I said, before they knew each other's secret identities. And so they're on a cruise ship together, and it like all kinds of crazy things happen. Like they end up like, I guess the ship is overbooked, so they have to stay in the same room. They're sleeping in the same bed. Parallel universal hijinks ensue where members of the crime syndicate show up. Their doppelgangers, Ultraman and Owlman, show up. But the main antagonist of the whole issue is Deathstroke. He shows up and he's there to kill Bruce Wayne. But anyway, that being said, his doppelganger shows up, which is actually design and eerily reminiscent of Marvel's Merc with a Mouth, Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same design, just in the colors of Deathstroke. So there are a bunch of on-panel gags and jokes around that whole thing. But that's a really fun issue if you're looking for some more Batman and Superman fun.
I remember because I got that series. This is the Jeff Loeb written one.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. From the early 2000s.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember that annual as well, and I believe that is a retelling of an earlier Silver Age story that revealed the Batman Superman, them learning each other's identities.
Now I think about it, I think the cover said a reimaginary story.
Reimaginary?
That was the subtitle.
That's an awesome name for that. All right. Good off the cuff pick there, Rodney. Sorry for throwing that curveball at you.
That's all right.
Kristen, what was one of your alternates?
Okay, so I'm also not prepared with the artist or the author. I'm the worst. I could look that up though.
That's all right.
But I was thinking I love Squirrel Girl Beats the Marvel Universe. I don't know if you guys have read that. But it starts out with Squirrel Girl like kicking Kraven the Hunter's butt. And just so you know, she has beaten Thanos and Galactus on her own before. So essentially, there's a mad scientist who's made duplicates of everyone in the Marvel universe. And so she has to defeat all these evil duplicates. But then there's also an evil duplicate of herself. So that's like the ultimate in who to defeat. How do you defeat yourself? So yeah, it's a really cool story. As far as I know, it only comes in trade format. But it's just a fun story, and Squirrel Girl is one of my favorite superheroes, and her best friend is Tippy Toe, who's like this adorable squirrel. And then of course all the squirrels are her friends and will fight her battles and stuff. So I really recommend that one. It's a lot of fun and a great weekend read. Something you can share with people. If you buy the trade itself, you can share it with others because it's worth it.
Yeah, good choice.
I'm seeing a connection here. You like animal stories.
I do.
I
do.
and I kind of know this about you already just from listening to Meanwhile the podcast, but I think that's great that you chose two comics that feature animal characters. So
yeah,
or animal related characters.
One's a little lighter than the other one.
Oh yeah. Oh man, yeah.
Well,
Talk
one
about
I
a
would
complete
describe as
180.
even all ages.
Yeah.
The other one, not so much.
Right. Yeah. Keep that with me.
Well, Rich, I'm really curious what you were thinking about for an alternate.
So, this is another group of people, three sentient beings that are friends, and it's another collection. I think their friendship throughout this mini series is excellent, but it's The Midas Flesh, written by Ryan North, artists Braden Lamb, Shelley Pearline, and lettered by Steve Wands. So it's Joey, Fatima, and Cooper. The captain's Joey. Their navigator is Fatty or Fatima. And their scientist is a dinosaur named Cooper, and they're all friends. They ultimately, like, they're headed to Earth, which turned to gold a long time ago. They're actually all aliens. Two of them just look like humans, but Earth, when King Midas was given his wish that everything he touched turned to gold, he eventually like touched the Earth, and literally a wave went around the Earth that showed like the entire thing turned to gold. The atmosphere turned to gold, like nothing is alive on the planet. And so they don't know this going into it. They just think there's a treasure here. They're kind of rebels. They're trying to make some money to, fight the rebellion against the empire. And they're running as they're like going into the system. There's layer after layer of defenses from the last like millennia or more of societies coming in and putting things up because they're like, don't go in here. It will destroy you. And so they're on the run, but they're also, looking for this treasure. And it's just very well written. You probably recognize Ryan North. He's a good writer, and their friendship of this group is really good. Oh, yeah. Okay. Kristen has the information on who wrote her comic.
Well, it's so weird because it's actually Ryan North. Ryan North wrote my Squirrel Girl comic that I'm recommending. And the artist is Erica Henderson, while we're on the topic.
Okay, yes. I should have guessed that. I am familiar enough with Squirrel Girl to know that Erica Henderson had a pretty large hand in her development at Marvel. So that's cool.
Indeed.
Oh, Rich, that I've never heard of that. And now I want to read it. You had me at dinosaur, but the rest of it sounds pretty good.
Yeah. It's pretty great.
Okay, great. Well, my pick, and this is I almost chose this one to talk about today as my week pick. But since we're doing this is Grayson, issue number 16. Mm-hmm. This is the issue where Grayson teams up with Agent One Tiger, and they're going around trying to take down all of Spiral's spies. And it's this great. I'm gonna see if I can. Oh, my camera does not work well. You can,
Okay,
I'm showing
snowboarding.
you're seeing Dick Grayson on a snowboard, but sorry that's horrible audio. But what this is a play on the James Bond stuff. There's even a great splash page showing one of the female characters in the story in silhouette, much like you would see in a James Bond opening segment.
Mhm.
The title sequence for that. And in fact, Dick Grayson is making up a song about himself and his new partner, his new friend, Tiger, as they go around the world over time, defeating all of these spies. It's a great little story. It has a lot of, it's a continuation of the Grayson series. Have any of you read the series in the past?
I'm not.
Yes.
No.
It's if you, I'm a unabashed Dick Grayson fan in any identity that he's ever in, and this was one of the most interesting ones that he's ever inhabited. But this is a great story. It was written by Tom Seeley and Tom King. This is when they were bringing Tom King in to DC Comics. So he teamed up with Tim Seeley, but I believe this one was written actually by Tom King. Oh no, it says Tom King did the dialogue, and they both did the story. So that totally makes sense because this reads like Tom King to me. Mikhail Hanin on art with Jeremy Cox and Carlos Manguel on colors and letters, respectively. It's a great little story about these two guys. Tiger wants nothing to do with Dick Grayson other than as a partner for the ends justify the means type thing to defeat Spiral. But Dick is just pushing hard, trying to develop that friendship, and in the end, much like Hobgoblin and Dream, Tiger admits that they are friends. So it was a nice payoff. But I love Grayson. I love this issue. So I highly recommend. People go read that series, but that issue in particular is just so much fun. So much fun. So
Awesome.
All right. So I tell you what. Let's remind everybody now that we're at the end of this. Let's start with George. George, remind us, what was your pick for Monday?
My pick for Monday was Giant Days #1.
All right, Rodney, for Tuesday.
For Tuesday, The Man of Steel, Volume 1, number 3.
And Kristen, for Wednesday?
Spencer and Locke, issue 1, but definitely recommend the trade.
Definitely, yes. Rich, for Thursday?
Stormbreaker, the saga of Beta Ray Bill, and it's the whole thing. All 6 issues.
All right. And then for Friday, as I said not too long ago, Sandman number 13. Great issue. And of course, all of the issues that we just talked about for the weekend. So that means, at the risk of repeating myself multiple times now, you now have, dear listeners, a totally awesome week of comics. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you. Meanwhile, at the podcast, George, Rodney, Kristen, and Rich for joining me on this. I had such a great time talking to all of you. It's nice to meet Kristen and Rich for the first time in this way. And we got to do this again. I hope you would like to do this again, because I can't wait to talk to you all again.
This was
It'll
fun.
be awesome. Yeah.
I'll come back with another Superman Batman book.
Depending on the series, you can't go wrong with those two. Okay. I will include links to everybody's socials that they mentioned at the top of the show, pointing to Meanwhile the podcast as well. But please send feedback to all of us. Send feedback to me at longboxreview@gmail.com. You can leave voicemail or text me even. Sometimes I get those things, but I really like those. You can do so by dialing 208. Dialing? Is that the right term nowadays? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's very retro. I like it. Go with it.
You got to dial 208-953-1841, or you can contact me, of course, on social media at Longbox Review, especially in Blue Sky, because that's where I'm most active. Twitter. Anyway, thanks for listening. And to steal your outro from Meanwhile the podcast, on behalf of George, Rodney, Kristen, and Rich, be well, everybody.